The first thing that comes to mind is that technology obviously evolves very quickly, but humans don't. And so always being super aware of people's needs and what we call human factors. Those, you can't get around those. You just can't. There's only so much weight that you can bear, or only so much people are willing to fiddle with or change their kind of natural behavior. And so I think regardless of how ambitious and exciting the idea is, unless you truly understand what people are willing to pay, and when I say pay, it's both with money, with time, with effort, with physical comfort or discomfort, you know, it's going to be hard. And so sometimes I think when we get excited about the future, it's easy to forget the importance of basic human needs. And so I would say humans evolve slowly, technology evolves fast, have to keep it in balance.
And I would say if you were coming into X today, what a remarkable moment, because we have AI, we have some of the rational things will be taken off our plates fairly soon. And so what an incredible time to exercise what only humans can do, which is imagination that comes from each of our own personal context. And so this is the opportunity to use those superhuman skills of dreaming together and imagining together into the world that we want to step into.
Ivy, Isabelle, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Of course.
Happy to.
Let's start all the way at the beginning. We'll get to you in a minute, Ivy, but since you ended up at Glass first, Isabelle, how did we find each other? Like, how did you crash into Glass, X, Google?
Yeah, I was working at a design agency in the city, in San Francisco, and it was at the time where LinkedIn was new. And one day I thought, why don't I put up a profile? And literally the next day, I get a ping from one of the recruiters. And she said, would you be interested in talking to Google? And I thought, well, Google doesn't make physical things. I'm an industrial designer by training. So I was surprised but intrigued at the same time. And then she started talking to me about, have you heard about self-driving cars? And I lied and I said yes, because I've never been that obsessed about tech press or technology. I've always been more interested in the field of furniture and jewelry and things like that. And so, but she was very convincing. So I decided to come and visit and meet a few people. And that made me even more intrigued because nobody would say what they were working on or what their role was. So anybody I met, I was trying to guess, are you an engineer? Are you a designer? Like, who are you? But I had a bunch of really interesting conversations. And then I thought to myself, I didn't move across the Atlantic to not take risks. I'm from Sweden originally. You probably hear it in my accent. And we had lots of good conversations. And I decided to take a leap of faith, and without knowing whatsoever what I was going to work on, because nobody would tell me. And and I showed up first day and found out that I was going to work on Google Glass.
And Ivy, this was 2.5 years after Isabelle joined, I think.
That's right.
You and I met each other in early 2014. Is that right?
Yes, I got a mysterious note that says your name came highly recommended from senior leadership. There's a role at Google X, but you have to sign these papers and we'll tell you what it's about. And I was in New York City, and I remember running to a friend's office to print it out, sign it, and send it back. And I ducked into a Starbucks. I remember the booth I was sitting in, and you and I had a conversation, and just getting to know each other. And it was a great conversation because I talked about my dad having been an industrial designer. I think you talked about your grandfather and how he influenced you. And from there, I think about 15 interviews later, including one by Isabelle, because I got to meet all the different skill sets that were at Glass, from marketing to engineering to design, because my role was to be a bit of a general manager or a general manager. So I, at the time, was considering another role. And I remember closing my eyes and going, because I think I knew you were working on the next edition of Glass, and the first one had launched. And I thought, oh my God, great technology, great idea, ahead of its time. I'd love to work on this, but you wouldn't show me, and I understand why, where you were in the next one. And I closed my eyes and I thought, it's similar to Isabelle. We're both risk takers. It's like, why not? Like, I could go to this other company whose name I won't mention, and I said, but I know what that would be. Here, this is stepping into the unknown, which to me is the ultimate creative act. And that's why I said yes. And also based on some of the people I met.
Yeah. I remember for hiring you, Ivy, I'd been talking, at the time I was running the Glass team and had been, by the time we hired you, for about a year. And I was so frustrated, not like deeply frustrated, but I was a little frustrated with the team because they wanted their real boss, their future manager, to be everything. And I was so frustrated with this long list of, she has to be this and she has to be that. She has to be perfect on all 8 of these fronts at the same time. I bought this big stuffed unicorn and I left it in the middle of the table in one of the conference rooms. And I called it Susie, after sui generis, that you would be like, because they were looking for a unicorn, something that like literally defined the perfect manager for them. And I think they got something kind of like that in you.
Thank you.
Well, really nice.
I remember taking the unicorn home, so I think you gave it to me after I think about a year. But I understand why, because it was such different disciplines that all had their own perspective on what was important and what was important to them in a manager. But luckily, I had been head of marketing in one company. I'd been head of design. I've been an artist. So I understood the multiverse of possibilities and humans. And so I feel, and I had this passion for technology and moving things forward. So that collectively made it easy. And I think I'm a good study of deep diving and understanding who I'm talking to and finding a way to connect.
There's so much to unpack here. So many fun, interesting stories. Some of them great. Some of them, they were painful, but they drove a lot of learning. Let's start with the problem first. I'd love to hear from each of you. X is fond of saying we start with a huge problem with the world. And I don't think that Glass was any exception to that. But unlike some of the things that we do, the problem might be less obvious at first. How would you each describe, let's start with you, Ivy, what's the problem? Like, why make something like Glass?
The flash I got, and I'm a visual person, is I think it already existed in the office when I got there, was this beautiful sequence of drawing of when man first was, on all fours and then stood up, and we were starting to go back down by looking down on our phones. And that the idea that Glass would make us be able to not look down, but be in the moment, look forward, and get all the information we need by not taking our eyes off the ball, so to speak. I mean, so that is it at its simplistic level. And I thought that was a beautiful sequence of, could we stand up straight and get information available to us when we need it, how we need it.
I love that you bring that up, because it was literally one of the first things I did when I joined the team was to have this drawing made. And because I was interviewing a bunch of people working on the project to try to understand the why behind. And then it hit me, it's like we have evolved as humans to be able to stand up straight. And here we are in the beginning of this smartphone era, and we're just consumed by these devices. And, the feeling I got from the team, what they wanted to achieve was to free us up again and to be humans again.
That's interesting. I mean, I I definitely vibe with what you just described. But what's interesting is there's something very physical about what you both described. My version of it would be, I always saw glass as giving us the opportunity to pull back together our physical experience of the world and our digital experience. So rather than having these very never the twain shall meet experiences, they could be part and parcel of the same thing. They would start to feather into each other, which, yes, you're right, involves leaning down a lot when we look at our phones. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's
No, and
it's
I think we're
interesting.
saying the same things. We're talking about I think maybe because we make physical things, we're thinking of the physicality of it. But at the end of the day, by being able to be upright and be in your analog world and get that digital information in the moment, being present where you need it, like not having to run home and look up something online, but to have the information come to you when you're looking at something is phenomenal.
For both of you, but maybe particularly you, Isabelle, since you were there and I think kind of helped start it, talk about the Explorer program. It's one of the most phenomenal things I think we've ever done at X.
Yeah, it was a really interesting process of, instead of all being in our heads and tinkering, the idea was how can we rapidly prototype experiences, especially with the product that has never truly existed before. It was so important for the team to really, again, immerse ourselves in the opportunities and challenges and really experience it, because there's no way of simulating that. And so the Explorer program was this idea of, I think it was originally every month was the idea to bring out a new prototype that we could all wear and test, and for the software engineers to prototype different experiences, for the UX designers to try out different OSs in a sense, and for us to continue to strive towards something comfortable, lightweight, and wearable.
So what you're describing was our internal version of the Explorer program.
Right.
But then what did we do after that?
Oh, yes. So at some point, once we had gone through, I think 7 iterations or something like this.
Ant, bat, cat, dog, you remember?
Yes, it was all animal names. And I think we started off with almost a backpack, and then we went into something that was about 500 grams. And then eventually we created a prototype that was, I think, under 50 grams. And I think that was determined by human factors experts to be the maximum weight that someone could pretty much bear to wear for longer periods of time. And I will never forget, I got a phone call from Sebastian Trun at the time, and he said, "We're going to go public with this prototype." And I was like, oh, crap. I thought I had more time. I thought we had more time to iterate and perfect and continue to drive it even further. But I think there was that notion at the time that we need to learn from the public. Because this is as much of a technology problem as it is a social experiment in a sense. So the decision at the time was to open this up to, I believe, 10,000 people, give them access to this prototype. And I call it a prototype and not a product intentionally because it was truly a prototype. And
it was a learning platform.
It was a learning platform, and then it was launched to the world in a very special way as well, through jumping out of airplanes. And so that's how the Explorer program started.
I still meet people today at dinner parties that when they hear where I work, they don't even know I was involved with glass, but they, with such excitement, say, I was an explorer. Yeah. And so that idea of engaging the public to a place where they feel like they're part of the creation of something was a super clever idea.
Right. It wasn't just kind of user research on steroids. Mm-mm. It felt like this extended community was co-creating with us. Mm-hmm. It was very special. Yeah. So 2.5 years after the Explorer program started, you're now responsible for glass, Ivy, and things have gotten more complicated because somewhere along the way, the world has started to understand that learning platform as a product, though it wasn't, if we're really honest with ourselves, a product yet. It was still a learning platform. What are your memories of sort of wrestling with that tension of how beautiful we were trying to make it, all the ways that we were trying to sincerely make it a really exceptional experience for people, but also we didn't really fully know what it was for or who it was for yet in some ways. Like,
yeah, well, that was in some ways both, it's like I love the tension of opposites, right? Like you say, the good and the evil or bad or challenging in it. But, things started to come up, i.e., and when I joined, we were already working on the next edition and trying to incorporate those learnings and seeing could we do something that made sense as a next edition. And we started to be aware of all the pitfalls, the unit, maybe getting too hot, and we really don't want people wearing a separate battery pack. Looking at the problem and looking at the solutions, and to what Isabelle said earlier, knowing that it was something that was a wearable, there was a maximum, weight, heat. So, because some of these problems were solvable, but not in a way at the time where you could still make a beautiful object. Some of my memories of trying the different use cases were, for example, going to, I think, the Young Museum had a Keith Haring exhibit, and we had an app where I was actually with Keith Haring's sister walking around, and you would look at a painting.
You're wearing glass.
Wearing glass, both of us, and you would see him spray painting that image in New York City, where I grew up during the 80s, and it dimensionalized the experience. I mean, talk about immersive, and I think that's where we're headed now, a lot of immersive experiences, but it truly gave you the depth of understanding of this museum experience, or you would look at some information and all of a sudden you get an image of him in his studio. So it was one of the best use cases in that you were in a place captive where, because it's perfectly acceptable. People take headsets and wear them for audio. But this idea that you could now in museums have this visual also. I know that a lot of us were playing with really dreaming of things. Like I know I wanted glass because I walk around being a creative and I have images, like I love the way the light's hitting that tree, or I get inspired by the wear on a tire. And I thought, wow, if you could, it could be my mind's eye almost. And in the moment, I could take a picture of what I'm seeing and talk about what's inspirational. And then I could go home and it was already downloaded, kind of a diary of my inner thoughts. So I remember we did a lot of work that was great, really speaking to young people about their dreams. What would they want glass to do? Because the great thing about being involved with this process was it was almost a technology looking for purpose. Yeah, looking for a purpose.
So I think we should get back to that purpose and that tension, but I want to hit on another one, which is you both are no strangers to technology. You both have a product side to you, but you're both artists also and you both happen to have an interest in jewelry in particular. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear from both of you how that played out. Maybe let's start with you, Isabelle. Like you were working, I remember those early backpacks, people were trying to do hats. They looked as bad as wearables have ever made so a human person look, more or less, in the very early days. Mm-hmm. And you were bringing such different sensibilities, trying to sort of solve for a purpose we hadn't even perfectly defined yet, mm-hmm. but also bringing these issues from clothing and armor and jewelry and things like that. Like, what was that like, trying to bring those sensibilities into that team?
Wow. I think there's always that balance of wearing that pragmatic hat of what problems do I physically need to solve? Like, boring things like how do you make sure that people can even see the display with people with different distances between their eyes and head widths and, the whole human factors piece, and how to design something that is wearable just to begin with, for a wide variety of people. And then on top of that, trying to create something that, a lot of people would be willing to wear.
From an aesthetic
perspective. And that goes beyond even trend, like just physically, like what eyeglasses that fit you are very different from what fit me. And, I would always mention to the team, like, and show them a picture of an eyeglasses store. And it's like, you go into an eyeglasses store and you see thousands of styles. And that is, ultimately, we're not going to be able to get around that fact that a lot of people are going to need something to fit their style. And so we started working on kind of a modular approach, if you remember. So you can swap out that frame for different eyeglasses frames. And that was a big moment for us because more and more people felt more comfortable wearing this piece of technology because it was something more familiar to begin with. We often talk about in our design process to ground the unfamiliar and the familiar to make it more digestible. So that was trying to solve that or thread some of that needle of, creating a piece of technology that yet have to have an aesthetic sense to it. And then Ivy always says this too, design is about solving problems. So try to come up together with the engineering team of a mechanism that you can swap out these styles, but still being robust. And so, yeah, it's a intricate process, but as a designer, I believe it's my job to inspire people. And then if I can inspire them, then I can have influence and then you can have impact. So a lot of it was, in the early days or throughout the process was about, storytelling, showing videos and images and just visualizing like this is what it could be. And were we able to do all of those things? No, but we were able to move the needle a little bit.
So then as you inherited it, Ivy, this is a funny kind of compliment to you, Isabelle, but I would say potentially you got ahead, and the designer team got ahead of what we were otherwise really delivering. Like the thing on someone's face was incredibly comfortable, lightweight. I think it just objectively looked really cool and beautiful, I would say. But we still hadn't totally nailed like who needs this and exactly what are they going to do with it. We had already successfully got it on the DVF like runway models in New York, which on the one hand was an incredible experiment and it was great, but it also built the expectations that then sort of maybe ended up kind of far ahead of people's experience of it as a product. Ivy, what was your experience then when you took over this thing, which was clearly gorgeous? It wasn't like, this is ugly, it's heavy, it's not wearable. Like that wasn't your problem. It almost was making such a promise that you were playing catch up.
Yes. And two things I want to say, Isabelle and team had done such a great job. The first edition was, I remember even in the interview process, walking around the campus with Sergey and telling him how I felt about you don't take something new and put it on a space band. Like you do, to Isabelle's point, we're both believers in this. You have to take a new technology and ground it in something familiar. So really by the time we were working on the second edition, that was clear that had to be the case. But it really was a case of not starting with user journeys. And it's an interesting dance because I've been part of a lot of innovation labs. There is a dance you have to play because people don't always know what they want.
For sure.
So it's a push-pull. You have to lead them. But in retrospect, I think from the beginning, and I think everyone was so excited about what could be, right? Those were in the days of technology for technology's sake. And I think now things are getting more balanced because people realize that it needs to have the reason why, not just the how. And so we really tried to bucket things into those use cases, taking pictures, making phone calls, getting information brought to you where you need it most. And there was so much refinement to be done on the software side and the user experience in each of those. I remember we had, it was, and everyone had their own, some people at the time, times are different now, were very upset about the camera, And I remember we dug up posters, you'll probably remember this, from, when the handset telephone was first launched, a woman picking up the handset and screaming like, "Ah, what is this?" Or when the camera first came out, there were articles about people hiding under park benches because they didn't know what this thing was. But we were battling against so many different aspects, like one of them being the fact that people were not comfortable with being photographed whenever. And so we were working on things like, how do we cover it up? How do we only expose the camera? Was that a better thing to do, or was that too secretive? I mean, it's interesting when you think about 11 years ago now, how times have changed. And sometimes culture just catches up. So some of the things we were dealing with then are not that issues now. There were a lot of problems, including some of the heat and the actual user experience. Do you slap the temple to do certain things? What was that actual user experience versus, in retrospect, was there another way to operate it? So there were a lot of things that were absolutely brand new. And in some ways you could look back and say, too many new things in one piece. And I think the consumer will accept new actions if they are getting something big in return. I think it's one of those, that's the magic equation. You can have them learn new behaviors, but you have to deliver to them something that's worth them learning a new behavior. And I think that's a lesson here.
Isabelle, what are some of your memories of the early fights, which now in retrospect, maybe it seems obvious what the answer was, but at the time, I remember the team went hammers and tongs, like literally, should it be a hat? Or monocular versus binocular, right? Should it go in both of your eyes or just one of your eye? What are a few of your memories of ones where either you thought it was obvious and you couldn't believe that other people weren't getting there, or that it really wasn't obvious and that it was sort of surprising how it got resolved?
I mean, I would say there were big ones and small ones. I would say one of the big ones was the whole debate about should it look like glasses or not. And I think there were definitely two camps. There was some people who felt strongly it has to look like glasses, and some people that felt it has to look like something totally new that nobody's ever seen before. And of course, as a designer and as a problem solver, I'm like, I'm going to offer both. So designing a system that could both be something very futuristic, like the first edition, as well as something that could be modularized into glasses. And then I thought, what a great opportunity to test both. But that was one of them that kind of kept on going a little bit in circles in terms of opinions. And for me, I was very open and curious about which path made the most sense. But I always felt that, for example, sunglasses was a great opportunity to create something that looked more socially acceptable, that also kind of filtered a little bit the spaces and the moments that people would wear these. So most people don't wear sunglasses in the bathroom, but you could have someone wearing glass in the bathroom and make someone really uncomfortable. And so the form factor itself could help guide some of the behavior. And like what Ivy was talking about earlier, this was at a time where it was really unprecedented to wear a camera. And it was in many social situations not acceptable. And so that was another piece. But of course, if it's sunglasses, it's episodic. And so there was that whole debate about, is this an episodic device or is this something that is always on? And, personally, I was of the opinion that it is episodic until it's so useful that, you want to wear it all the time. And so that was a huge debate. I think there was a huge debate between should it have a camera or not even, or should it only have a camera. And I think that was also where, by using it, became very clear that the camera was a very compelling use case. I think there was a lot of parents on the team who just felt like, oh my God, I've never been able to capture these moments. Myself as a skier, I loved using it skiing. And so that was a debate. But then there were these fun ones, like with engineering. I remember, I would get these kind of off the shelf components from smartphones, and smartphones are blocks and humans are not blocks. We're all organic and shapely, and to shape something towards a face, you kind of need the curves. And so I got this square component. I'm like, I can't work with this. This is going to look like a square cyborg thing on your face. And so I try to negotiate with the engineer, like, hey, can we just, make it a little smaller? Can we, shave some some millimeters off here and there? And they're like, no, it's not going to work. And so I went to the sanding belt with this component, and I sanded off the edge of it. And then I went back to him and I said, can you plug it in and see if it still works? And it did. And then I got the permission to build a custom camera component so we could curve around it and create something that was slightly less intense.
That's what I love about Isabelle's passion. She drives to solution and models that for people. But, I remember getting, as much as we got people who were freaked out over the camera, we got these incredible personal stories and pictures of parents in their playground being able to hands-free play with their kids and document it at the same time. We also, I remember from one of the explorers who was at Harvard, I think a psychologist, he sent me once a note. He had developed software and called them happy glasses for kids with Asperger's who, a child cannot read the emotions of a parent at a dinner table or when interacting. So this video he sent me that we were all in tears over it. The child without his quote unquote happy glasses was very, no expressions on his face because he couldn't relate to what was happening around the dinner table, puts the glasses on. It had facial recognition software, in this case being used for something super positive, whereas other people, everything has a plus and minus, right? And it overamped the emotions. So the child would look at the mother's face, and in the child's glass would be a super cartoon version of a happy face. And so they were able to read, Mom's happy. And all of a sudden the video, the family is laughing, they're interacting. And so some incredible use cases that we had never thought of, that you could call fringe, including doctors using it in surgery and operations, and having their students see through their eyes, not just sitting behind a one-way mirror and listening to the commentary, but being right in that heart with that doctor. Or people on the assembly line using it to be able to look at an airplane or a part and have the catalog of information of parts and never have to leave the assembly line and call their supervisor and have a part brought to them. So there appeared to be use cases that we hadn't thought of.
Oh, hundreds, I think.
Yeah, that were coming up in industry and things like this that were super exciting, which I'll wait till you get to that part of what we did next. But
well, why don't you go there? Like, what did we do next?
Yeah, no. So I think we were like, oh my God, we should give this to industry. We should give it to, because there are we could learn a lot and not have to solve some of the problems of heat, because someone on an assembly line is perfectly capable of wearing an extra battery pack on their belt. And, a lot of things, I think even the BlackBerry, right, started out in industry and then went to consumer. So it was a great way, we sold a version to industry, and that went on for a couple of years quietly, or maybe not so quietly.
Well, we sold it a little bit into industry under you, mm-hmm. and then I guess we'll bounce around a little bit here. Glass mostly went away. Then Glass came back to X was rebuilt specifically for industry.
Right. Well, I think it
Yes.
showed that there was a real market there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think glass went away because it was clear it was ahead of its time and not ready for the public, but yet it had this other use case. So we took what we had made and kind of were able to give our original quantity that we had to industry, but we went away and actually, Isabelle and I moved on to Google. But then it became clear that the demand for it was such from industry that it needed to go back into manufacturing and be manufactured just for industry.
So glass came back to X, lived under Ivo Stavorich, who's going to talk about it also, and then moved back to Google a second time.
All good things come around. It's
Yeah,
like fashion.
right.
If you hold on to it long enough, it's popular again.
So I want to hit on this thing you just mentioned about being too early. So I would argue that X's job is to be the right amount too early. Every time, on everything we do. It's a hard thing to do, but it's a little bit like catching a wave, right?
Yeah.
You can't start paddling when the wave is right on top of you. You're way too late at that point.
Yeah.
You don't want to paddle frantically and there's not a wave coming for the next 10 years. You're just going to wear yourself out. Do you both believe, in retrospect, with whatever we can see and all the mistakes that we made, we were just too early, too early, and there was really nothing that could have been done. It just needed to be a wave we didn't catch, and the wave's coming again, which is great. So in a very, very real sense, you were right. Or do you think that there's a way we could have caught the wave if we had just rolled it out differently, made some different choices?
I really do think I think it blew the door wide open to something fantastic. And I am so grateful for that. Mm-hmm. And so I think it has a place in history, and it provided incredible set a tone of what's possible. But do I think by trying harder or doing more use cases, I do think the technology was just too early in terms of there are certain problems that have to be solved, like Isabelle mentioned the eye box and one eye versus two, and weight and heat. And so I think it was right actually to blow the door open, walk away, because I don't think there was anything we could have done in the short term. But I think watching what's emerging, and everything is about timing. And I agree with you. That's why I came to X. What I love about X is it's about exploring possibilities. So my answer when I say it was too soon if you wanted to make it a commercial success to the masses at that time, not too soon to be a moonshot of what's possible.
Well put. What do you think, Isabelle?
I think it was an incredibly important project, and I keep on calling it a project and a prototype because I don't think it was ever a consumer product. But we have to remember too, like a lot of the voice interface work started there. Okay, Google. That then a couple years later, went into speakers, and, it started a lot of the conversations around social acceptability of cameras. Like, I think it was such an important project, and I think it did a lot for the industry. And so it depends on what your success metrics are, I think is the question. But yeah, I mean, hindsight is 2020, and I always curious about, if we time traveled and we were more humble and didn't over promise on some of the functionality, or there are always these what ifs, but yeah, so that's my non-answer. What is your perspective? I'm so curious to hear yours.
I don't know, right? There's never we don't get do-overs in life.
Yeah.
I do wonder if we had a slower growth and a slower burn. Like, we ramped up so fast, so hard. You were there during like the intense period. And we didn't make certain mistakes. Like, we hired really fantastic people. We didn't lose the culture. It was pretty amazing, actually, how fast we grew, and we were building a factory for building these things. But that momentum then required a kind of momentum on the business side that was, it turned out, not matchable because we just weren't there yet. So I do wonder if we had just gone at half the growth rate, right, still growing at a good clip, that would have bought us a chance to sort of stay ahead of the wave of public perception. I mean, who knows? But I think if we had found a few ways to keep people really focused on, we're calling you explorers because this is not a product. Please do not buy this if you think this is a product. You will be disappointed. If we had been a little bit more insanely clear about that, I think maybe people would have kept going with us on the journey.
Yeah, it's really like a social experiment because the concept was so new of trying to put out to explorers only this idea of a prototype. You can't help but the people being judged by the people around you. I mean, it's almost in hindsight to map out where, I think the excitement was so big, to map out where could that have made some pitfalls, and maybe there was a better way to do that. Because I do agree, I have to think about, could you have done that in a different way? Because the idea is brilliant. The question is, what happened? I also understand it from a human standpoint. People not really, it was such a new idea. Yeah. Not really, those who didn't understand it would judge it and judge it for a product. And it just became, it outweighed, the bad outweighed the good.
On the earlier days of the team, even when you were there, Ivy, the team had some really nice traditions. Things like Superhero Cape or the Get Weirder Award. There were several like that. Any that really stick out to you as being kind of foundational to how the team worked and why they got so much done?
I remember the science fairs we used to have, which was a great way for everyone to, and we kind of even brought some of that learnings into Google with us. I mean, we now have a studio crawl, even at Google, at Hardware, where people, kind of the hidden things that they're working on come out of the closet and on the table. But I remember some great science fairs where people were always working on what glass could do and possibilities, and even eye tracking before eye tracking was even more mainstream, right? So I remember the image I get is almost a room full of magicians, that I would love to walk through. We did it quarterly or something where people would pull out what they had been tinkering with, which was so inspiring.
Yeah, I remember.
For me, I just remember really the culture of prototyping was so huge. And I think prototyping from both from a software perspective and a hardware perspective, but people were constantly making things. And then I would also say the team was also constantly using the product. And I've had experience in the past where people work on something, but they don't really engage with it. It's just, it's my job. But I think in the culture, this was so much, people were so invested. People were using this on weekends and, in their spare time and trying new things and, hacking things together. And sometimes people would come to me with like, hey, I made this new, I made these new glasses. What do you think? And, I would cringe sometimes, but I would love like the creativity. And so I think there was very much a culture of tinkering, prototyping, and just living and breathing the product and truly like owning it.
Which I know in some ways that, I always like to say, and I think you and I have this in common, Astro, the definition of play is doing something different than you do every day, but without a preconceived outcome. So this idea of having some time to just tinker, build, make, explore, let it lead you down a path you wouldn't have preconceived. And often I think in companies based on scheduling, you don't have that time. And that's so important because you need the time. That's how discoveries happen, is when you're tinkering and when you are not pressed to get that end result by 7 o'clock tomorrow night.
100%. What happened to glass when it moved from X to Tony Fidel's world? Tony had been brought in he was the CEO of Nest, but you ended up with Glass graduating to him. The thought at some point, it's healthy for graduations to happen from X. A change of context allows for them to grow. This is the wrong place to do the scaling, kind of by definition. If this is the right place to do the exploration, it is the wrong place to do the scaling. And the thought was, since things like the iPhone and the iPod had grown up under Tony, maybe Glass would do okay there. Any stories from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all acknowledge that glass, as in its full glory, some of the technology needed to progress before it would really be something that was wearable 100%, so that we started to back up and look at different versions that could be stepping stones to it, which I have to say we were right on because, we had versions where it was audio only, no camera. We had all kinds of variations of wearables that used combinations of glasses and audio, or even just audio, that were beautiful and turned out to be years later variations of which we now see in the marketplace. So had we launched them then, we would have been ahead of the curve, because again, it was a logical, sometimes we even say now, you rehearse the future to know how to step back to the present. And I feel like that is exactly what we did at that time, coming out of X, with the future to us was glass. But what was the logical step back? And so it was, God, I don't remember, was it a year or 2 years? It was no more than 2 years.
Couple years.
Yeah, no more than 2 years of some beautiful prototypes that were very far along. And then Tony left, Rick came in, and the emphasis was on, not that he didn't believe in wearables, but the emphasis was, let's get the fundamentals down first. If we're going to have a hardware business, we have to start with phones.
Sort of speaking of phones, I see you're wearing a Google Watch, and the very first Google Watch was built, you were there at the time, was built at X. This was Monzi, right? Working with a design team from Google in Zurich, and some of the phone people who were at Motorola at the time, which we had just purchased. Do you remember that? And this was taking some of the Google Now idea, or what later became Google Now, and doing it first on the watch. Did you interact with them?
Yeah, but I wasn't directly involved in that journey, but I remember the time. Yeah.
But then I remember us playing around with, was it watch faces with e-ink or some kind of...
Oh yeah, we did a ton of exploration.
Yeah.
I wish we could show it all. There's some really exciting
I know,
things.
there was some great... I
one
loved
day
some of
they
that.
might come back, so
we won't say anything.
Keep it close. But at one point in my career, I started getting frustrated because I'm like, I can't show my friends and family what I'm working on. I've been working for years on all these cool things, and but you have to have patience, and like Ivy said earlier, timing is everything. And eventually, we had this vision for this watch for 6 years before we launched it, basically. So sometimes it's all about timing. Just keep on proposing the same idea, just in different ways.
Yeah, sometimes the world catches up with you, and you just have to be prepared. I think that is, I know from our experience, I think we feel like we are prepared to, jump when we need to, with all of the experience we've had. It was great. You're remembering me. I'm getting emotional because of the fond memories of, those days.
Me too, Ivy. What are some lessons learned on taking moonshots? You both went through one of the wildest moonshots that we've done. What are some lessons that if I was starting my first day at X and you wanted to give me a few words of wisdom about how to prosecute moonshots as successfully as possible, what would you say?
The first thing that comes to mind is that technology obviously evolves very quickly, but humans don't. And so always being super aware of people's needs and what we call human factors. Those, you can't get around those. You just can't. There's only so much weight that you can bear, or only so much people are willing to fiddle with or change their kind of natural behavior. And so I think regardless of how ambitious and exciting the idea is, unless you truly understand what people are willing to pay, and when I say pay, it's both with money, with time, with effort, with physical comfort or discomfort, it's going to be hard. And so sometimes I think when we get excited about the future, it's easy to forget the importance of basic human needs. And so I would say humans evolve slowly, technology evolves fast, have to keep it in balance.
And I would say if you were coming into X today, what a remarkable moment, because we have AI, we have some of the rational things will be taken off our plates fairly soon. And so what an incredible time to exercise what only humans can do, which is imagination that comes from each of our own personal context. And so this is the opportunity to use those superhuman skills of dreaming together and imagining together into the world that we want to step into. And so I think it's actually a great time. And then we need to take those ideas and co-create back with the technology that allows them to be birthed.
Ivy, Isabelle, thank you so much for doing this with me today.